Okay, let me get this adjusted here. Thank y'all for having me. Hopefully this won't be too scientific. We want to try to keep this fun. And hopefully you want to go buy a steak after this and support the beef industry. I love doing this talk. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. I find it very, very interesting. This will go along well, especially with what Dr. Lawrence brought up yesterday, is we have increasing carcass weights, and we have to figure out a way to handle those cuts on the backside. One of the things that came up during questioning in his talk was how we handle the ribeye when we get cattle with a 23-inch ribeye or increasing weight. What do we do with that? Because if we try to cut a 16-ounce ribeye to put it on a plate, it's going to be paper thin. So I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about some other cuts and some utilization things that we need to do as an industry to make sure we're getting the best possible outcomes for a carcass. So I won't focus completely on heavyweight cattle, but that will be the gist of the presentation. So just a little bit of introduction and some of the areas that I pull these points from and these talking points is we do short courses all the time. A big portion of those, we work with people not traditionally associated with the industry. So think chefs. Last week we had the U.S. Meat Export Federation in our house, but 16 different countries in the building. All of them were heavy importers of U.S. beef. So we got to interact with them very, very closely and figure out what are they buying, what do they want, what are they looking for, and how can we use some of the parts of the carcass for their needs and keep supplying them a good product. So I wanted to start out with a little bit of a history lesson on how meat cutting in the U.S. has progressed over time. So again, in the 20s and 50s, and again, way beyond that, it was primarily home processing. So 50% of the cattle that would have been harvested in that time period were still being processed at home. I am one of those individuals that in my lifetime grew up with a family that processed everything. Cattle, pigs, primarily. Those of you who ever driven a 40/20 tractor, I think that was our harvest machine of choice. We would hang cattle up, we would hang pigs up, and we would butcher them in an old wooden barn, and that was at the point when food safety was a myth, okay? But that is what we did. And as we progressed into the 60s, we started to improve our ability to harvest cattle at a large scale. And mind you, in this time period, you're looking at relatively small carcass weights. You don't see these big weights that we're seeing now. A 600-pound carcass was more likely to be found. If we walked into the cooler today, we probably would not find a 600-pound carcass. It'd be a unicorn. And then again, so home processing today, that's less than 1%. Okay, it's not very frequent. And then we moved to cutting in the retail store. So if you've ever been into some of the old IEP plants or some of the old beef packing plants, a lot of them have loadout areas in the carcass cooler where they would load whole carcasses into the truck and ship those directly to the grocery store, where they would be cut in the grocery store by skilled and trained butchers. Can anybody tell me what was wrong with that scenario? What did we run into a problem with frequently? There's two things.
Sell it all.
That's the biggest one. They had to sell it all, okay? They had to utilize every single part of the carcass, whether they had a market for it or not. So carcass utilization in this aspect was very, very good. The big issue with this is, say we get around Christmas time, can anybody tell me what the number one cut is that we sell right around Christmas? Prime rib. Okay, so if they brought in 10 sides, okay, to cut for that week, and on day one they sold out of prime rib, guess what? Everybody else is out of luck. And so we had to move away from that system because we weren't getting the products we needed. And again, the other problem that came with this is lack of skilled butchers as we progressed through time. Okay. So then in the 70s and 80s, that's peak period of box beef. We started implementing box beef. We started cutting into subprimals that would fit in boxes, palletized. It was easy to ship. If I only wanted to buy ribeyes, I only had to buy ribeyes. I didn't have to buy the whole carcass. Very, very efficient method for selling and transporting beef across the U.S. The early 2000s, now we're getting into shipping case-ready product directly from either the retailer, the purveyor, or the packer to the grocery store. If you've been into a Walmart recently, there is no butcher, there is no skilled labor there. There is a person in the back that takes out pre-packed cases of beef, sets them on the shelf, and that is how you get your beef in the store. You would be hard pressed today to have a local grocery store that has a skilled butcher that knows how to cut in the back of house. They may know how to run a grinder, they definitely know how to clean, okay, but they may be able to cut a steak or two, but they are not what we would call a skilled butcher. They don't know how to make specialty cuts. They don't know how to break carcasses down. They just know how to position, make, put stuff out. They are able to cut some stuff in-house. Okay, so I want you to think about old school meat cutting. We've kind of got an old school and a new school. Old school would be how I cut beef when I was at Angelo State, freshman, sophomore, junior year of college. And that is take it down and throw everything on the bandsaw and cut massive bone-in roast, massive bone-in steaks, and we packaged everything bone-in, and we didn't do any fabrication, so to speak. That is old school cutting. And there are a lot of mom and pop shops probably around you, if you do custom beef processing, that still cut this way today. And so carcass utilization from this fact is very, very poor. Okay, you're not pulling a lot of the extra steak cuts. You're doing everything bone in when you do this method. And then again, the only thing that you're really pulling steaks on is the middle meats. There's no extra cuts that you're pulling. Think ribeye, New York strip, sirloin, tenderloin. You're going to get roast from the quarters. And in a lot of cases, thin meats are cut up and thrown into ground beef. I have seen it time and time again. Again, it's steaks and ground beef and maybe some roast. We're not utilizing in those instances what we need to from that particular carcass. And there's no issue with this, but the consumer we have today does not want this. They want the specialty cuts if they're going to the mom and pop shop, and they don't want these massive bone-in roasts to take home and have to try to figure out how to cook. Okay, the generation we have now that is purchasing this, if you gave them that, they wouldn't know what to do with it. Okay, I grew up eating stuff like this, but I'm telling you, the new generation of consumer doesn't know what to do with it. So what do we think of when we think of new school meat cutting? Boneless. Okay, the big driver here, we are going away from a lot of the cuts that you would sell bone in. Yes, we do make a lot of cool cuts that are bone in, but boneless is the trajectory that we are on. It's easier, it's more versatile in the kitchen. From a food service perspective, a lot of the chefs we have now prefer boneless. They don't like working with stuff with bone in because it is more difficult to cook and time consuming. And we've gotten to smaller portions, especially with the way we break down a sirloin, which I'll show you here in a little bit. And we are attempting more labor-intensive fabrication. If you go to your packer, your mom and pop shop, and you tell them, Dr. Schwartz said, you have to start cutting my cuts of meat this way, you might get kicked out of the building. I've had this happen to me before where I teach people how to do this. And it was, I was with Dr. Davey Griffin at A&M, and we were teaching meat processors how to cut this way. And one of the guys in the back literally stood up, he's an old school meat processor, and he said, quit telling our customers this crap. We don't want to cut this. We don't have the skill to cut this. And so that's kind of what we're dealing with on the small scale side. But on production side, you know, think our big plants, our big purveyors, we've entirely switched to this by necessity. Partly because of carcass size, by weight, and demand for a lot of the steak cuts that we are being requested to cut. So some bullet points, why is carcass utilization important? The carcass weight that I've thrown up here from the quality audit, don't think of that. We're over 900 pounds now. We're way up there on carcass weight. And I know a lot of people laugh when we talked about, and Dr. Lawrence brought up 1,500 pound carcass weights. It is a true reality of what's to come. I mean, they're getting bigger, 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 bigger. We have a hard time finding small carcasses when we go evaluate cattle in the cooler at these packing plants. The small ones are hard to find. The big ones are easy to find. 20 years ago, that would have been reversed. Okay. Portion control. We've got a lot of issues with portion control, specifically with the strip and with the ribeye roll. So we talked about, because cattle are getting bigger, these portion or control people, or the people that are the purveyors selling to these steakhouses, we're having to get a lot more creative on how we cut these steaks. And we're having to sort ribeye rolls and strip loins in a more progressive manner to get them to the ounce requirements that they need on their menu. Okay, if Outback Steakhouse calls and says, I need a 12-ounce ribeye, that is a very difficult task with the cattle size that we have currently. Increasing demand for steak products. Steak demand in not just ribeye, tenderloin, strip, your basic cuts. Steak demand on specialty cuts is as high as it's ever been. And we are lacking some of the infrastructure and the knowledge in a lot of these places for these cuts to be put into retail. Most of the time, those specialty cuts, you're going to find them food service only. It's very rare you find some of these in the retail sector. And then again, we've got to get better at breaking these cattle down. We've got to reduce cattle population. We have to utilize them in the best possible manner, whether that be increased number of steak cuts. One of the things that came up at USMEF last week is we had some importers that asked, with the cattle supply where it is currently, are we going to be able to still get the product that we need? Are we going to have to redirect and buy something that we wouldn't normally buy in order to hit our orders? And we told them the answer, in some cases, yes. If you rely strictly on ribeye rolls, I hate to tell you, but you might have to find a different cut if you're an importer. Like Dr. Lawrence said, we've talked to a packer recently that's pre-sold through 2027. And so you're going to have to get creative on what cuts you're using, what steak cuts you're using as we go forward. So areas of opportunity, I've pointed out some, just kind of a broad skin here. We're talking about the red meat yield equation and what we're doing there. It's been brought up to use 3D imaging, carcass scanning. That's, to me, kind of a pie in the sky type idea. It will be difficult to implement in the plant, but it does have some merit. Portion cutting. Some of what I'll talk about today is alternative fabrication methods, marketing of minor cuts of beef, how we evaluate food service, and then I'll spend a little bit of time on the last three, just making a couple points. So 3D imaging and carcass scanning, the goal or the idea of this would be, if you could implement this, and I'm saying if you could implement this in a plant and you can get a true scan, 3D scan, and you can measure subprimals, you could pre-sort cattle based on subprimal size and send them to where they would best fit. So if they needed to go, and those cattle needed to be made into short loins rather than strip loins and tenders, you could use this as a sortation method in the plant to partition those cattle off and cut them in a different way based on size. But again, I think this is something that's still, we're far away from this type of technology that we can implement at the speed of commerce in a plant. But it is something to think about. Portion cutting. This is something in the last 10 years that we have done very well. There are a lot of good companies, one very big one in Dallas that does an incredible job of portion cutting. The machinery and the technology that we have in place now to do different things with portioning is unreal. If you want to go on YouTube and watch some videos and how these particular systems work, but the amount of waste we produce in a system like this compared to hand cutting steaks, which is what it would have been done for probably 50 years prior to that, everything would have been hand cut. Our waste has gone significantly down, in our portions, our ounce hits that we're trying to hit for menus in restaurants across the country have become extremely accurate. I can take a slab out of a sirloin, put it on the belt, the machine will scan it, and if I need to produce 6, 8, 10, and 12-ounce sirloin steaks, it will scan it, run through the portioner, and cut the steaks best fit to optimize those settings. And then it will sort those ounce requirement steaks at the end of the chain into 6s, 8s, 10s, and 12s. It's pretty incredible, some of the technology we have for portioning. So what are the problem children that we have with portioning? So everybody assumes that as carcasses get bigger, that all cuts are a problem. That is false. There are a select number of cuts that become an issue when cattle get bigger. The two biggest problem children are the ribeye and the strip. I would argue that almost every other cut on a beef carcass, it does not matter if we make it bigger because of how we utilize those cuts. You could argue with me that maybe, okay, yeah, briskets are getting too big. It's hard to smoke a brisket at the size that they're at now because of the way we cook them. But again, brisket just keeps going up in price per pound, so why would we want to make them smaller? Okay, so the big one, the big two is portioning on these two. Well, we have figured out the strip. We have yet to figure out the ribeye roll, and that's for a variety of reasons. But I'll get to those slides here in a minute on the way we portion those two cuts. But it has everything to do with thickness and ounce requirements for a menu. I have seen a lot of restaurants as of recent, especially high-end restaurants, that have switched their menu to market pricing on their menu rather than putting a physical price because of this very reason. And they don't put ounces either. They give you an estimate because of this portioning problem. So alternative fabrication methods, I just wanted to give you an outline of some of the big subprimals that we would pull off a carcass. This is by no means everything, but this is the big ones that we would think about. If we took these off, this would be the majority weight of a carcass. So the chuck, me personally, this is one of the most underutilized sections of a carcass that we have. When I give this talk, I preach we have got to do more creative things with the chuck. There are so many good cuts of beef, especially steaks, that come from the chuck, and most of the time, in a lot of instances, they end up as a roast or ground beef. And right now, when we've gotten into a point where we have issues with cattle supply, issues with getting steaks on the menus, we have to do a better job of teaching people how to cut specifically the clod and the chuck roll to pull these cuts of beef and get them on a menu. The likelihood of these ending up in retail, very slim. Okay, you see it from time to time, depending on how good your grocery store is. Food service is where we got to do a lot of legwork on these two particular cuts. The USMEF folks had a lot of questions about these two particular cuts when they came last week. They are thinking about shifting and want to put a bunch of attention on these two, especially some of the countries we talked about, to try to get some more cuts of steak if they can't get what they need. So we think about the shoulder tender, the top blade, the mock tender, under blade roast, which you would get your Denver steaks from, shoulder center, and boneless short rib. There are a lot of good steaks in the clod and in the chuck roll. I recently just did some videos for NCBA, kind of partnered with the Beef Checkoff and the Texas Beef Council, where I have taken apart basically every subprimal we have and showed a lot of those innovative cuts and innovative cutting methods. So hopefully we get those edited. I looked at them yesterday with the videographer. We want to get those out soon so that you guys can use them, the packers can use them, retail can use them. But again, I want to put some emphasis on these two. The trending value-added cuts that I want to point out that we need to start pulling and we need people to start utilizing. My favorite cut of beef, unequivocally, there's nothing that even comes close to it for me. I will take a flat iron any day of the week over any cut of beef on the entire carcass. It's the second most tender cut on the entire carcass. The only thing more tender than a flat iron is a tenderloin steak. I just looked at the cutout on the sheet. Tenderloin's bringing about 14 bucks a pound. Flat iron, as a top blade pre-trim, was bringing about $4.50 a pound. Okay, so if you come over to my house and we cook steaks, more than likely you're getting a flat iron. Okay, because I can feed somebody for $5 or $6 versus 15 or 16 bucks for a steak. So these cuts like this are the ones we're talking about, where we've got to start pulling some of these steak cuts, and we do it at our meat lab. But at retail, you're not seeing it show up yet. The places you're seeing these cuts show up at is in food service, and we've got to start making a push for food service to represent these cuts as good as possible. The rib, again, so the products that you're gonna get off the rib, and I've got them down here, is you've got the ribeye roll, the back ribs, the rib lifter meat, and the rib short ribs. The back ribs coming off of here are kind of like the redheaded stepchild, nobody wants them. They're very, very difficult to sell, they're very, very cheap, most of the time they're half the price of ground beef. I think that will change in the near future. The number one barbecue joint in the state of Texas that was just announced number one by Texas Monthly, their claim to fame is beef back ribs. So we may see an elevation and some of those going up in price. I personally have never liked beef back ribs. I didn't think they had enough meat on them. But if we can find a market for them, let's do it. Rib lifter meat, that's another kind of value added product that we can pull off the top of the rib and market in a variety of ways. A lot of that will go to special trim. So think steak bits, marinated product, ground ribeye. If you wanted to put a ground ribeye burger on your menu, you theoretically could call that ground ribeye, and then rib short ribs. But obviously we know a lot of the short rib market we have in the US is export. If you go to the Asian market, particularly in the US, short ribs are a big, big product for them, a big deal. We had a group from Taiwan in not too long ago, and we got so many questions about the short rib, which here in the US is not a product that we think about often, okay? So let's talk about these cutting methods, and I probably need to spend some time on here. I'll get in trouble with Dr. Carr. She wanted me to really, really talk about this particular cutting method. So if we are making these bigger carcasses, this is your option. This is what you have to resort to. We have looked at, okay, what can you just cut this thing straight down the middle, not do anything, not trim anything, take a ribeye roll, cut it straight down the middle and sell it. Doesn't work. Okay, because of one muscle. Does anybody know what the muscle is? Your spinalis dorsi, or your ribeye cap. If you ask a ribeye connoisseur in this room, that is the best part of a ribeye. That is the reason you buy a ribeye. That's the reason you want a ribeye. Those ribeyes we had at lunch, when I went and picked out my steak, guess what? I looked for the one with the biggest spinalis on it. Okay? I got that. See? And Dr. Sable, my mentor at Texas A&M, he always called it meat candy. Okay? And would always say that to the end of the meal because that's the best portion of the ribeye. So the issue we have had with marketing this cut, for one, is if you take this off of a ribeye, people don't want to buy a ribeye anymore. The premium you're getting is with that cap on the steak. And so if we take that off, what happens is we peel the cap off. Most of you know ribeyes have a tremendous amount of kernel fat on the interior of the cut. When you take the cap off, you no longer can sell that kernel fat in the steak. All of that intermuscular fat comes out. So now that's a yield loss, okay? You paid $14.99 for this ribeye roll, and now you're already losing weight with this method. So the cap comes off, the kernel fat comes off, and typically on a ribeye, guess what? I'm allowed to sell the tail portion. And on a ribeye roll, I'm allowed to have a 2x2. So I get 2 inches on each side that I'm allowed to sell you as a pack of that. When I go this method, it doesn't look right on the steak, and so I have to cut it off. And that right there, depending on the cattle and how fat they are, that's upwards of 2 to 3 pounds of product that comes off on something you just paid $14.99 a pound for. So you're starting to see now why this one has not gained traction. And I'm going to tell you what I think we should do in order to give it a push that it needs. We don't have an issue selling cap. We can pull the cap and we can sell that. I just looked on Omaha Steaks website. I look at them for retail values from time to time. They're selling this for over 70 bucks a pound. We don't have an issue selling ribeye cap. We could pull every one of them that we make in the US and we would not have a problem getting rid of them. The restaurants would take them in a heartbeat. The problem comes, what do you do with the longissimus portion that is left on the ribeye roll? Some restaurants I have seen market that as a ribeye medallion or a fillet of beef. They try to get creative with it when they put it on there, or some will just say a ribeye. I would highly advise against just saying ribeye if you have separated it this way, because if you get somebody in this room, they're probably not gonna be very happy, okay? We need to push this steak as a different cut. Give it a name, okay? Chefs are great at that. Give it some crazy name, get marketing behind it, and start pushing on it. Go to the big markets, start selling this product, start pushing on it, and get the price per pound up. We can recoup the loss of the yield on the kernel fat in the tail with the spinalis, some of them. But the problem is then this goes down in price per pound the opposite direction when you cut it this way. So we have to do something creative marketing, and I don't know what that name is. Y'all probably have some good ideas. We can throw names in a hat and draw, and then let's go. But that's something we got to think about. This is the problem cut on bigger cattle. Okay. So some innovative trending value cuts on the rib. Some things I want to talk about. The ribeye cap steak. I don't want to spend any more time there, guys. We don't have a problem selling it. We know it's good. The price per pound is high enough. It's easy to get. The big one and the one we get requests for all the time is a tomahawk steak. Everybody and their dog that comes in the store wants a tomahawk steak. Why? I have no earthly idea. Okay, you could not get me to pay for that amount of rib bone at 20-something bucks a pound. So why do we make it? Any clues? For idiots? Entertainment. That's what I tell people. It looks cool. That's why we make it. And I will never not tell a customer that walks into our store that I won't make one of these. For one, the price goes up a pound. And two, now I'm selling bone for 20 bucks a pound. And three, if somebody wants to buy beef and they're going to support the beef industry and help improve the beef demand, and they want this cut, we're going to cut it. Even though we as a group collectively probably will not purchase that product. Okay. But we will continue to cut it. We will continue to sell it in our meat lab. If it helps drive the cool factor of beef, those are the kind of cuts that we have to market, even though we may not be the group that eats those. Okay. The new one with this, and I don't want to spend any time on it, but now they butterfly that thing, flip it upside down and point the tail up on the bone, and we're calling it a scorpion steak. So you may see that one. It's been around a couple years now, but it's very difficult to cook. It's hard to close the grill lid when that bone is sticking up 2 foot in the air. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the loin. So when you think of the loin, we think tenderloin, we think strip loin, we think sirloin. We don't have much issue on big cattle portioning these cuts. The strip would probably be the biggest one that we have an issue with, but sirloin, because of the way we cut it, we will never have an issue, no matter how big the cattle get, on cutting a sirloin, because we do a cross cut and take a slab and then cut those into sirloin pieces. The tenderloin, never have a problem with tenderloin. Okay, the bigger cattle get, hopefully the center or barrel cut that the chefs love just keeps getting bigger and bigger, because I can assure you they will not complain if that happens. Okay. And then you think about the tri-tip, the bottom flap, bottom sirloin flap, and the ball tip. Those are sections of the loin that would have been not even utilized 20 years ago. Okay, they were a lost spot. Right now, I just looked up at the price. The bottom sirloin flap, if you didn't know this, is one of the fastest growing price per pound cuts on the entire cutout sheet posted by USDA. Okay, it is on the same playing field right now as a strip loin steak. Okay, $10 a pound. It is, if I'm making fajitas, I get rid of the skirts. I'm taking sirloin flap every day of the week. It's thicker. It's got a little bit more fat content. It's juicier. The chefs have figured that out, and they are chasing after it. It's a premium product. Texturally, it has the same texture as a ribeye cap, which is also part of the reason why it has had some success. Okay. So strip loin cutting. This one's easy. We talked with the USMEF folks last week. All we do on a strip is we take a knife and we cut right down the middle. And you feel bad when you do it. I did one the other day for you just feel like you're committing a crime. when you cut a steak this way. It feels bad. You take the knife, cut right down the middle, and you split these sections in half. Part of the reason we can get away with this is strip loins are cut on a 0x1. They have very, very minimal tail on the end of the steak, and the fat trim over the top is also very minimal. When we cut these steaks, they look like little medallions, almost similar to filet mignon. And the restaurant industry, primarily hotels, food service, big catering, think if you go to a big conference such as this and they serve you a dinner or an evening meal. I have had this type of strip served to me many times at these conventions in that way. Hotels have picked up on this and they love serving this way. I talked to Liz Wunderlich from the Caribbean region for USMEF, and a lot of the destination islands and a lot of those places where you would go to resort, they're almost exclusively buying strips and cutting them this way. They have found that it serves easier, it's easier to cook, it's easier to portion, it's a great portion size for the plate. So again, when I tell you as cattle get bigger, we're not gonna have an issue on the strip, okay? I believe that wholeheartedly. I have eaten these before, I have no problem with them. The one time you get in a bind is if you get cattle that have a very thin strip or a small ribeye. As you go back and you get in that saddle region, like right before you get to the sirloin, that muscle gets very, very thin. And so if we get to that point on those animals that have that thin strip, these steaks would not look very good, okay? Which is why I said we've got to have some level of carcass sorting at the plant if we're going to cut this way so that we can send product to its best destination point. Okay, there's what it would look like in the store. So sirloin cutting, we've come a long ways in sirloins in the last 20 years, okay? We used to, and some of you in this room may be old enough to remember, if you went to the grocery store, your sirloin steak looked like a Fred Flintstone steak, and we had to almost put 2 styrofoam trays together to get the steak to fit on one tray. And we've realized that that's not the correct way to cut a sirloin. You've got muscle fibers running in different directions on this particular steak. So instead of cutting across the grain, you would cut some across the grain, but others you were cutting parallel, and you weren't getting the best use of that cut. So let's look at how we would break it down now. So now we take and we make a bottom sirloin and we make a top sirloin. And so we would sell that. That would be your primary sirloin cut. This would be your ball tip would sit right here. That's 2, 7, and 6. And on the outside, that would be number 1. That would be a tri-tip, okay? Or what we Texans would call a California brisket, okay? The joke is California sends us their brisket. We send them tri-tip, okay? But we now separate, instead of cutting this in one steak and just trying to sell it as a sirloin, we've now marketed 1, 2, 3, 4 products, okay? And I haven't talked about this one, but if you've been to Brazilian Steakhouse recently and you've had picanha or sirloin cap or culotte, this has also risen a tremendous amount in popularity in recent times because we're pulling it now. We used to never pull it. It used to stay on the sirloin. And now we sell a center cut. If you've ever heard Outback's advertisements, they advertise on their menu center cut sirloin. Okay, they take off a couple of muscles right here, which we would use slang rat and mouse muscle. But they come off because they're a little bit tough, and they use this portion right here to portion steaks. But again, these are ways that we have improved cutting over time. With cattle size today, there is no way on God's green earth that we could cut that steak and have a tray big enough to put it out at the retail chain, okay? So some trending value-added cuts that I wanted to bring up. I've already talked to you about the flap. If you have not tried bottom sirloin flap, go out and see if you can find some and make fajitas out of it. It is a game changer. You will never buy skirt or flank again. Nothing against those 2 products. This is bad, okay? The other one, and we've had talk, a lot of the chefs get frustrated at times with their yield loss on tenderloins when they bring them to the store because they want to sell that barrel cut, that center cut, that nice portion. And so they have all this excess. The chef told me the other day that it's in some cases 40% loss on the product coming out of the back. When you're paying 17, 18 bucks a pound, taking that amount of loss is difficult to stomach. So one of the cuts that we try to promote is the second head coming off of the, and let me see if I can get back to it here. So right here on the side, that second muscle that comes off the head of the tenderloin is called the iliacus. And it has the same texture and consistency as tenderloin, but it kind of branches off to the side and it makes the tenderloin steaks look a little bit weird. So now we have directed and we've tried to get chefs to pull this muscle off and sell it as its own cut. Okay, give it a funny name. Chefs are great about doing that. Give it some kind of funny name, throw it on the menu, and sell steaks. And then the other one again, sirloin cap, we talked about that picanha. So cuts from the round, again, this is the hard one. Again, we don't have a lot of round cuts. Round's gonna go to ground beef, tenderized steak for chicken fry, jerky, and then in some cases roast. But because they're very lean, they're not very sought after for roast. But we are pulling some value cuts back out of the round. I want to tell you something. We've had some pretty big discussions, and again with our Asian folks that have come on campus about this braison cut. And in some cases, the packer has started to pull this cut for export. Let me explain to you where this muscle comes from. Where your Achilles goes into your calf, that is the muscle. So if you tear your Achilles, you have separated your Achilles tendon from this muscle. It is one of the toughest, hardest eating steaks in the entire carcass, but Asia absolutely loves it. They cannot get enough of it. When they were in our building, they were pestering us as to why they couldn't buy more of it. It's kind of like a petite tender. We can only make so many of these a day. It's the size of a petite tender. It weighs less than a pound. Okay, we're only going to get a couple pallets of this a day from a plant that's killing 5,000 head of cattle. So great cuts to add, but we're limited. And again, the slang term for this, if you need a good name for it, is called the mother-in-law's tongue. Very, very tough. I have experienced eating it in a ramen shop before. I went and they said, you want steak, beef, or chicken? And I said, I'll have the steak. And this was the steak that I got. It tasted like I was eating straight cartilage. They love it in Asia. So again, we're going to keep selling it. The other thing that would come from the heel, both of these are from the bottom round. This is a Merlot steak. Very rarely will you see this on the menu, but it has very, very small muscle fibers. So the tenderness is there. It's just very, very difficult to pull. It takes a skilled person with a knife to get it out. And then if you've ever eaten pre-marinated beef fajitas from the store, so you go in the store, you buy that pre-marinated pack of beef fajitas, 9 times out of 10, you have bought this muscle right here. It is the gracilis cap over the inside round, and we call that a Santa Fe steak. Makes great fajitas. You got to add some tenderizer, okay? Because it is a little bit on the tough side. So marketing of minor cuts of beef. This is one of the things that I'm really passionate about. I always like finding cool things that I can charge more for than ground beef pricing. But we love it when our customers ask for this sort of thing. So this is a new one for us. If you haven't seen this one already, this is called a Thor's hammer. And this is a beef shank that they have Frenched. So very similar to a tomahawk. That bone right there probably weighs about a pound, pound and a half. So we had customers, we didn't want to cut it. We had customers coming in the store asking for it. We want a Thor's hammer, we want this. So we cut this product, okay? And I took trim that would normally go into ground beef for $4.99 a pound. And now I'm selling another pound and a half plus this at $8.99 a pound. I've doubled the cost and I'm selling a pound and a half of bone. And again, it looks cool. That's why we're selling it. Am I going to purchase this? Probably not. Does it taste good? If you know how to cook it, yes. Okay, slow roasted, let it fall off the bone, put it over a bed of rice or mashed potatoes. It's great. Am I going to pay $8.99 a pound for this? Probably not likely. But again, that comes down to carcass utilization. If we have a low cattle supply and an interest in all these cuts, we need to be cutting them and we need to be pushing them. Okay. Again, my favorite, I always got to promote the flat iron. If there was a brand ambassador deal for the flat iron steak, I would be at the front of the line, I can assure you. Other cuts to think about: deep pectoral, chicken fried steak cut, lifter meat. So off the top of the rib, we can start pulling some of that for steak bits. One of the things we experimented with a little bit at the meat lab is taking the rope meat that runs on the inside chain of the carcass and doing a pre-marinated beef boneless wing out of that product. So what are we doing in this space at the moment? So right now we have a project funded by checkoff dollars to look at minor cuts of beef as it relates to carcass size. For the longest time, we have looked at carcass size as a bad thing, and we've evaluated all the things that get worse as carcass size increases. This is the first instance that I can think of where a project has been funded to look at what does a big carcass do better. And so this project is tailored to evaluate, of those minor cuts of beef that we're producing on a carcass, a lot of them are pre-sold months in advance. So think petite tender, shoulder tender. I worked at Friona Cargill for 3 months when I interned there, and I ordered a box of that product. 9 times out of 10, if you try to order that from a plant, they're 3, 4, 5 months pre-sold on a product like that. They cannot physically make enough of it. So what the goal of this project is to look at the proportion of these minor cuts that have high demand and evaluate what proportion or percentage do they get bigger on a bigger, heavier weight carcass. Do we help improve some of the demand and fill that demand on those increases in carcass weight? Just some small tidbits again to help try to improve carcass utilization. I know this is a little bit off topic for what we're talking about, but recovered lean trimmings, a lot of people have a poor taste in their mouth about these types of products. They've kind of been smeared for the industry for a very long time. For any of you in this room that want to talk about sustainability and say that you take sustainable approaches and you don't support a product like this, you should not be able to say that you support sustainable practices. This is one of the most sustainable things that we do in the beef industry, because if we did not extract these products, it would not ever make it into the food supply chain, and it would be an extremely underutilized product. Okay, I have eaten LFTB in the plant where they make it as a taco product, and I would put it up against any ground beef product that I could buy directly from the store today. It's a clean product. It's great to blend and trim. Right now we have a trim shortage. We've got to use these types of things to our advantage. This question was brought up, and I threw this in the slides. Again, is utilization of old cattle for high demand beef cuts. Right now, we can't really talk about this topic because of the low cow herd and undersupply of these types of products. But again, at USMEF last week, they asked us about these products, their taste, their flavor. If they can't get fed product, is this an alternative for them? And I'll tell you, the export market, we fed them white cow strips, we fed them utility tenderloins, and we fed them utility strips. And they all received very good rankings from a sensory perspective from these other countries. And so that's some products we got to think about too as we fold into the mix. I know it doesn't fall into the heavy carcass talk that we've talked about today, but I wanted to just bring that up. And then I wanted to end on one of the things that's one of my biggest pet peeves that we still do in this industry. We've put in some stuff to do some research in this area, but why have we not switched as an industry completely to vacuum packaging? The most inconsistent, wasteful form of packaging that we do today is PVC overwrap on a styrofoam tray and stick it out in the grocery store. And yet we continually buy and purchase and use that form of packaging. There's reason for it, but if we can push the consumer and educate to switch to vacuum packaging, on top of switching to buying a frozen product, we do very well selling frozen product in Meatloaf. Doesn't work so well at retail. Okay, we can get to a point where we have a little bit more marketability, we have more shelf life. Okay, and you're gonna get a better end product to that consumer. But a lot of this goes back to color. PVC, nothing can touch it in terms of color development in the case. People want that bright cherry red, and so again, that's part of the reason why we haven't moved away. Okay, a little bit of a soapbox there at the end, I apologize. But in conclusion, we've got to find creative ways to market these cuts. If we're going to keep getting bigger, heavier hot carcass weights, there are ways around it. The fab side of things is not gonna be the issue. It's gonna be how do we market those cuts when we change our fabrication method for food service, for retail? We've got to get the consumer to want that product. And so again, every time we fabricate an animal or we bring in boxed beef, we have to have a great plan on how we want to market that product, how we want to make those steaks, and who we're going to sell that to. Beef cutting and fabrication are to me pillars of sustainability, and I think it's something that we should think about when we start utilizing some of these cuts. But again, if you have any questions, I would love to start taking them. Hopefully that was fun for all of you.
Question two.
Have you looked at the eating characteristics of the larger carcasses versus the smaller carcasses? Does it change tenderness? Does it change any type of consistency there?
Yeah, so the question was, as carcass size changes, what happens to tenderness? To my base knowledge, without just getting too far in the literature, you're not seeing much of a difference. If the age is relatively the same, you're not gonna have big discrepancies in tenderness. We had this conversation last night. Tenderness in the US is not an issue anymore. We just did the tenderness survey at Texas A&M, and all of the cuts that we evaluated in the retail supply chain fell in the tender and very tender category, which is why a lot of the research funded today has no tenderness component in it. We are so good at aging beef. We are so good genetically in the supply chain that, again, we talked about, Mandy talked about it, 20, 30 years ago, one in 5 or 1 in 4 states, you had a bad eating experience. Now, we'd be lucky to find 1 in 10 that said they had a tough steak. And so I don't think that's gonna be an issue as you increase the size, unless we just get them so old that we start having issues with collagen cross-linking in those cattle. But I don't think that extra bit of time in the feedlot to hit that weight is gonna be an issue.
So when you think about this wave of young consumers that are all of a sudden are gonna be, driving consumer preferences, I really wonder how many of those really know what a ribeye looks like. And so I like your point of let's take that steak, let's call it something out. I think we can still keep the value, because I'm not sure when they go to the meat case, they'll know that the top muscle is taken off.
Yeah, it's a great point. Again, with this generation, they're looking for the cool factor. And if you can put the cool factor on the plate or give it a name that they have never heard of, and they want to try something new, that's a great way to do it. The one reason that the strip has done well and the ribeye has not is we have marketed that as like a strip fillet, like nobody noticed the difference in it because it's always been a single muscle. On the ribeye, we have done a very poor job of marketing that fillet portion of the longistment, even though it's the exact same muscle that we're doing very well with selling the strip. We've done a very poor job of marketing that. And either we've got to come up with a creative name or we've got to have a marketing campaign to push that style of cutting. That's the only way we're going to get it to take hold. The other thing is food service and the purveyors are going to consistently complain about the waste, regardless if they can charge more per pound. When they have to start cutting those tails off and they lose all the kernel fat internally, there are going to be some serious complaints from that regard. The people that have been able to make ribeye work so far are high-end restaurants where people are going there and they don't care what the steak costs. That's where they've had success with the ribeye.